Welcome to this video tutorial where I'm going to be showing you how to draft your own sewing pattern for not just a top but also a dress as well. And you're going to come away with the knowledge to be able to adapt everything I'm sharing with you to work for your dream clothing ideas. The reason for this is because I always share the why of what you're doing. I don't just say add 2 centimeters here, do this, do this. I am explaining why you are doing what you're doing so you can change everything to work for your dream clothing ideas. And in case you're new around here, I am here to help you create clothes that you love to wear. And that means creating clothes that are made up of 2 aspects. Firstly, that they fit to perfection. No one wears clothes, or no one wants to wear clothes that don't fit to perfection. And the second thing you'll really find I focus on in my world is how to create clothes that feel like you, that make you feel confident, that give you an extra spring in the step. And that means being able to, first of all, discover what your unique style is, and second of all, being able to draft the sewing patterns for those dream clothes. To be able to draft your own sewing patterns, there are various different tools you need. Now, I'm not going to go over the specifics of every single tool because I have another video on that where I show you everything you need to know to start drafting your own sewing patterns. But I'm just going to give you the quick list of tools, which I'll pop below as well, so that you can start drafting your pattern with me today. So first of all, you need a propelling pencil and a rubber to go with that. You also need sticky tape that you can draw on, some paper scissors, a tape measure, pattern cutting paper. Now, if you don't have a huge roll of pattern cutting official paper, then I recommend the rolls of paper from IKEA. They're really, really good, and it means you're not sticking lots of pieces of paper together. And then your rulers. So a little short ruler can be really, really helpful. A longer ruler can be helpful, but we also want to make sure we have this one essential piece of pattern drafting equipment, which is our pattern cutting ruler. Now, I'm going to be showing you how to use this during this tutorial, but the main thing you want to make sure with your pattern cutting ruler is you've got this 90-degree line and you've got these increment lines here, because these are going to help you really speed up that pattern drafting process. As well as those tools, you're also going to want to have these pattern cutting blocks. These are going to act as your templates to be able to create your sewing patterns. And so that means they're going to do the hard work for you and speed up the process so much. So what you're going to need for this tutorial is the front and back bodice block and also the sleeve block as well. You're going to see that these are a little bit small for an actual person to wear. That's because they are in half scale rather than full scale, so that I can show you this tutorial easily on the screen, but also they're really, really good to start practicing those drafting techniques with, so you're not wasting lots and lots of materials. I want you to get drafting straight away, so I'm providing you with a free sample set of blocks, including the front and back bodice block that you're going to need for this tutorial, the sleeve block that you're going to just want to stick together once you've cut it out because it doesn't fit on one piece of paper, and then also the trouser blocks as well that you'll see I've got another tutorial for as well. So you want to just print them out in the size that works for you, A4 or US letter paper. Then you're going to cut around them, stick together the sleeve one that you need, and then mount them onto card kind of similar to this, like a cereal packet, so that it's really easy to draw around. So I'll link these below so you can download these and get started drafting straight away. So that we can make the drafting process as smooth and easy as possible, it's really, really good to first of all get clear on the design you want to be creating a pattern for, and then secondly to go through what you want to be doing at each stage of the drafting process. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to first of all just go through how to gain clarity around that piece you are wanting to design, and then second of all we're going to create what I call a pattern cutting to-do list, so that you know exactly what you're going to be drafting and in what order, so you're not going round in circles. So to first of all get really clear on the design you want to draft a pattern for, what you want to do is first of all gather your inspiration, brain dump any notes, and then bring that all together in a couple of drawings. Those drawings need to represent the front and the back of the garment. Obviously, if you're creating an asymmetric design, you can't just do half like I've done here and here. You really don't need to be a fashion illustrator. I am 100% not one. So it really is about just scribbling that design down and then thinking of what is going on in that design. How are your hems going to be finished? How are you going to get into that garment? Do you need to add any other elements? Is there anything for your lifestyle that would be really handy? Would there be pockets? Or for me, over the last couple of years, it was really helpful to create clothes that were breastfeeding friendly. So really think what is going to suit your style and your lifestyle. Now, as you'll see here, I have drawn up my design that I'm going to be showing you how to create the pattern for, but I have an orange line on it as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm first of all going to show you how to draft this little top here, so this kind of crop top design with the short sleeves. Obviously, if you created it, you don't need to create it in the sheer fabric. You can create it in a fabric like this. You can create it in whatever fabric you want. And then I'm going to show you how to hack that pattern to turn it into a dress like this. So you're going to come away being able to create patterns like for the clothing here, and so many more options as well. But that's why I've done the different colors. So we're going to start off with this core pattern, and then we're going to add on it to create another pattern as well. So in terms of creating that pattern cutting to-do list, so we have a checklist in order of what we're going to be doing at each stage of the drafting process. What we want to do is place Spot the Difference with our blocks that are going to be our templates to create our sewing pattern. So we have our sleeve one and our front and back bodice blocks here. Now, because this is a symmetrical design, you only need to do half of the back and half of the front. If it was asymmetrical, you would want to trace around both of these so that then you could do the full front and the full back, so you can show that asymmetrical design. But because we're doing symmetrical designs, we don't have to worry about that. So as always, when I'm creating a pattern cutting to-do list, what I recommend doing is starting in the middle area of the body. So with a top or a dress, that's kind of that tummy, that bust area. That means we're really thinking about what's going on with this dart, and we're really just working our way from the middle and working our way outwards, because generally if we work our way inwards, that's when we find we're going around in circles when we're drafting our own sewing patterns. So once we've done the bodice, then we will go on to do the sleeve. And that means then if we've adjusted anything around the armhole area, then we'll know to adjust it here so that all our seams are going to match up. Okay, so let's start creating our pattern cutting to-do list for this little design here. What I've decided is I'm going to have a zip down the center back, just part way down, so that you can get it on and off. Because it's not fitted around the waist, then we don't need to worry about having it all the way down. If it was fitted, you would obviously need to have a zip all the way down, because you wouldn't just be able to pull the rest off. But having a zip part the way down is going to be perfect for this kind of design. So as I said before, we want to start in the middle of the body and work our way out. So starting with the apex of the bust. So the first thing we want to consider is, does this dart work for my design? So if I was to sew up the dart as it is now, then it would close here and there would be a seam line here. I don't want a seam line here. I want it to be subtle. So what I want to do is pivot the dart. So we still want to honor the dart, so we're pinching out the fabric, but I can pivot it anywhere around this block. So I'm going to pivot it down to the side seam so it's super subtle under the arm. I still like a little bit of shaping even with an oversized garment, because I find it fits a lot better and hangs on the body better. But I don't want to add waist darts or anything, so I'm still just going to retain this bust dart and just pivot it down to the side seam. So that is number one. Pivot, front dart to side seam. Now, the next thing I want to consider is what I'm going to be doing with the neckline area. So then I tend to start at the top and then work my way this way. So I will consider the neckline. Now, because this dart is then going to have pivoted down here, I can then bring this neckline out and down. Like, I find the neckline of any generic blocks tends to be pretty high and not so like scooped like I've designed here. So I would just bring this down a little bit. So then I'm going to change neckline shaping. And because I'm going to be doing that on the front, One thing you always need to consider is if you're changing anything that's going to affect another pattern, piece of the pattern, another area of another pattern, you want to consider what needs to change on that. So if I'm going to bring down this neckline and this is going to come down, this is ultimately going to be sewn up here with this shoulder seam. So I then want to adjust the neckline here. So then I'm going to do it front and back. Now, because we're talking about this area here, let's talk about this dart, because I tend to like to follow where the pattern is taking me so that I know we've considered everything in the path of where it's going. So let's consider this dart. I actually personally would leave this dart because I find it shapes really nicely then to the shoulder. You can remove it, but I would recommend leaving it. So that is what we're going to do in this tutorial in both cases. So we're just going to leave that dart. We don't need to worry about writing that on our to-do list. Now the next thing we want to consider is if anything else wants to change. Do we want to change the hemline? No, I like the idea of it sitting on the waist. Do we want to change the sides? No, I like the shape. It's going to create like quite a boxy shape. Armholes? No, I think it's going to create a really nice shape to the armhole. It's going to work really well. That's the beauty of the blocks. They basically do all the hard work for you and they create a really, really good starting point. So then the next thing we want to consider is the sleeve. What needs to change with this? We haven't changed any of the armholes, so that means the sleeve head doesn't need to change. But the only thing that does need to change is the length of the sleeve. We're not doing a full length sleeve. We are doing a little sleeve, a short sleeve here. So we want to change the sleeve length. So like this. So then that is most of our things thought about. Now the last thing I always say is to remember, how are you going to get into your garment? So let's add that on, and we're going to be adding that zip at the center back. So mark on zip. And then with all patterns, what we're going to do is always add on our seam and hem allowances last, because otherwise you'll find they get in the way. So we'll add those on last. So I'm just going to write them as SA and hem HA just for short, and mark on our annotation so we know how to put together the pattern when we are actually sewing it up. Okay, so that's our quick to-do list for this little top. Now let's just write down what we need to do to then adjust this to this. So the only difference is firstly adding this gathered section, secondly lengthening the sleeves. So those would be our two things. The other differences, there aren't any other differences. The length is sitting on the waist, so we don't need to change that. So we're merely creating a gathered section. So let's go create gather, pattern piece, and then we want to lengthen the sleeve. And that's it. So then we'd have two patterns, and we'd again make sure we do this again. So that is our to-do list. Now let's get into drafting the pattern. All right, let's get to drafting. So what that means is literally us working through our to-do list. We're going to start by creating the pattern for our top, and then what I'm going to show you how to do is how to adapt that pattern to create the top of our dress, and then we're going to create an extra pattern piece for this gathered section at the bottom. Now, so that you can see exactly what I'm doing on the screen, I'm going to be using a pen, but please make sure you are still using a pencil, because you're going to find it's so much more helpful when you want to rub out a line that you don't need anymore, or when you want to turn that line into, say, for example, a dotted line, which will be a reference line, or a fold line. So always make sure you're using pencil. I'm just using pen so you can actually see it when I'm going through this tutorial. So first of all, you're going to want to grab yourself some paper, and you want to make sure you've got space around whatever blocks you are using as your templates. So you're going to want to have enough paper to draw around both of these with space around it. So I've got one piece for these, and you're going to want to have another piece as well, so you've got enough space to draw around your sleeve as well. You always want to make sure you've not just got the exact amount that you'd have for this size block, so you wouldn't want to have it like this big, but you want to make sure you've got extra so that we can add on those seam and hem allowances afterwards, because no blocks ever include seam and hem allowances. If they did, it would just mean they'd get in the way whilst we're creating our sewing pattern. So we always add them last. So make sure you've got your paper and then we can get started. Step 1 on our pattern cutting to-do list is to pivot this dart on the front bodice. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be pivoting this dart down into the side seam. So then we're not going to have this really obvious seam here. We're going to have a more subtle hidden seam line here. But we're still obviously honoring the shaping created by this dart. It's just going to be just pivoted to a different place on our pattern. Now, because our design is symmetrical, we only need to design half of what the full pattern would be, so we can then cut this on the fold. So our center front line will be cut on the fold, because then this is going to end up having this side cut out and this side cut out. Now, if you're doing an asymmetrical design, you would want to draw around both sides of your block. So this side, and then you'd flip it over, making sure your center fronts meet properly, and then you draw around this side too. Now, because this is going to be on the fold, if you have a straight line on your paper, which I do at the edge here because this is the straight edge of the roll of paper, then you can butt your center front line up against that and use that as a straight line that you then don't have to draw. Now, if you don't, you can obviously just draw around this line as well on your paper. So just bring this to the edge of your paper where you've got your straight line. And then what we're going to be doing is drawing around just part of our block. That part is going to be, first of all, this side only of the dart, and then around the neckline, and then here if you don't have that straight edge there. And then you're going to keep going round until you get to where you want your dart to come out of your side seam. So just grab yourself a pencil, well, you're going to be using pencil anyway, and just mark on your block that we can rub out later where you want that dart to come out. And then we're literally going to be tracing around up until that point. So I'm just going around here, my neckline, and then just this side of my dart down to here. So far I've got this. Now what I'm wanting to do is pivot that dart closed. So I'm going to put my pencil here, and then I'm literally going to pivot my dart until this other side of the dart closes up and goes together with the original side I've chosen. Now you can see this is all pivoted round, and then we're going to draw around the rest of the block. Whatever you didn't draw around, make sure to mark on your notches as you go, and then just do a little mark where that finishes, like so. So now you have got this like so, and what we can do is draw in our dart. So our dart is now going to come here. So we're going from where the original dart started, because our dart's still going to start there, and then we're just going to bring that out to where it finishes on the side seam. And there we have our pivoted dart all complete. So now the next thing we want to do is to change the neckline shaping, both front and back. So this kind of comes with toils and trial and error to know how much you want to lower it by, but I'm just going to lower it by what I would normally for this kind of garment, and I would probably lower this shoulder down by about 2 centimeters, and at the center front and center back by about 1 centimeter. Now those measurements are in half scale, so you would double them for full scale. Whatever you do in half scale, you want to double for full scale. That's the only difference between creating half scale and full scale patterns. So what I'm going to do, grab my pattern cutting ruler and just mark down that shoulder seam 2 centimeters. And then I'm going to mark down my center front 1 centimeter. And then for the first part of the neckline, so in this middle area here, you want to make sure it is at 90 degrees to your center front line. The reason for that is if you don't do that, what you're going to find is you're going to have a V shape like this. Your garment is going to cut out a V shape like this at the neckline. So if you want a V shape, go for it. But if you don't, make sure it's always at 90 degrees, even if it's just the first 5 millimeters or 1 centimeter or so. So I've done that there. And then I can do the same with the neckline here. I can bring it so it's just 90 degrees for the first little bit. And then I'm just gonna curve this really nicely, like so. And when you create your seam allowances, you're gonna find this curve just blends really, really nicely. It's just a bit more rough right now, but when we do our seam allowances later on, then that'll blend. So then just scribble out this. And then, like I said, we want to make sure whatever we do on the front, if that's gonna impact something on the back, we want to make sure we do that as well. So let's go on to the back now. Now, on the back, we want to make sure we've got space down the center back because we are going to have a seam, because we're going to need to put in an invisible or even a feature zip in the back. So first of all, draw around your block. We already decided we were going to keep this dart in, so you're literally drawing around everything. Make sure to mark in those notches. I've used this block so much. I need to make a new one so my notches are properly done again. Okay, so I'm just going to mark on here center back. I tend to mark things as I go because it just makes it easier at the end, and it also means you can really quickly and easily see, oh, yep, that's the back, that's the front. So because this shoulder seam is going to want to sew to this front shoulder seam, we want to move this down by the same amount. So that was 2 centimeters. So just mark down there 2 centimeters. And then I'm going to do the center back 1 centimeter. It could be different though, depends how high or low you want it, but I'm going to do it 1 centimeter because I like it to be a little bit lower at the back. You could leave it as is if you wanted. And then we're going to do the 90-degree rule again so that we don't have any funny V shapes. And then you're just going to blend that in nicely, like so. And when we do our seam allowance, this will make it super neat. And then scribble out the bit you don't want. If you're doing it in pencil, you can just rub that bit out. So that is step 2 of our to-do list done. The next thing we are doing is with the sleeve, because there's nothing else. We need to change from our templates, our blocks, to the patterns we've created when it comes to our front and back bodice. So the next thing we're going to get onto is our sleeve. Now I might even be able to, no, see, you would think I can fit this in here, but once I'm adding on my seam allowances, I'm probably going to find I've got a little bit of overlap. So grab a new piece of paper if you find that things are really, really close together, because you don't want to just add on a tiny little bit if you are missing 3 millimeters when it comes to adding on your seam allowance. So I'm going to grab a new piece of paper. And we are going to create a sleeve. Now to do this, we know that we want our sleeve length to be somewhere around here. Our reference line, our elbow line, is super, super helpful, because then we can think, okay, so my elbow comes at this point, and then you can literally measure on yourself how much higher you want it to be. And then because we're working in half scale, divide that by 2. So say for example, my elbow's here, I measure this distance here. I'm not going to be able to see so well, we're just going to do this roughly. Let's say I want to have it so it finishes here. That's 15 centimeters in full scale. So in half scale, that's going to be 7.5 centimeters. So I can then mark up from my elbow line 7.5 centimeters once we've traced around this block, because we don't want to be drawing on our blocks and meaning that they just get really confusing with loads of scribbles on after a while. They just get very messy. The odd little pencil line around the edge that you rub off, perfect, but we don't want to be literally drawing on these blocks. So start by tracing around your block, and because, like I said, we are going to be using the elbow line as a reference line, we want to make sure we are drawing at least further down from that elbow line, below that elbow line, sorry. And then again, make sure you have your notches marked on, because when you come to sew up your pattern, you're going to want to know 2 notches is the back, 1 notch is the front, and that is going to match when you're sewing around your armholes with your bodices in place. See, 1 for the front, 2 for the back, and that's always the case. Okay, so we want this reference line on there, so our elbow line, and I also recommend just putting on that center line because that can be really, really helpful as well, especially at the top. This is going to indicate you can have a notch here, and that is going to indicate that your pattern is going to match up where this seam is, where this shoulder seam is, wants to match up here. Now you can just draw around the whole thing. Let's just draw around the whole thing for now. So then if you need to know anything else, it's already there. So I've got these little notch points. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to mark on a dotted line. So we have them as reference points between them, like so. And then we'll do this one down here too. And then we already decided we wanted the length to be 7.5 centimeters above this. So what we're going to do, mark 7.5 centimeters up from our elbow reference line. I've done a little point there in the middle, and then we're going to use this reference line we put here, which is why I said they're really, really helpful. Line our 90 degrees up with that, and then we're going to mark the bottom of the sleeve like so. So then this is our sleeve pattern piece. Now the last thing on our to-do list for this top design is to mark on that zip at the back. So what you want to know is how long that zip is going to be, and you may find for something like this you want it to be, for example, maybe a 15 centimeter invisible zip, or you could have it longer. I wouldn't do it so it's all the length. I would probably do like a 15 or 20 centimeter invisible zip. So then you want to halve that measurement because we're working in half scale. So that is 7.5. We're literally just marking on a little notch point there, and then to mark on where the zip would be would go like this. Like so. So you're going to mark that on there, and you can as well write on the length zip you're going to use and the type. Just helps for later on. So then we've got our back bodice, our front bodice, and our sleeve pattern piece all complete. Now what we want to do is add on our seam and hem allowances to all of these pattern pieces, because currently they have no seam or hem allowances. They are the finished sizes that we would end up having sewn up. So we want to make sure we've got those on there so we can actually sew up our pattern. I find it really, really helpful to go around each edge and mark on how much seam and hem allowance I am adding. So then I'm not just in autopilot, because sometimes what I can find is I'm in autopilot and I'm like, just add 1 centimeter everywhere. And then I realize I should have added a different amount because it's going to be a hem or a different type of seam. So what I recommend in terms of seam allowances generally is to use a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Now, because we are going to bind this neckline though, we actually wouldn't put any seam allowance on there because we don't want it to be bigger. Our binding is going to bind around this edge really nicely, and we want it to finish where it already is. So this would be a 0, but I will literally write that on there so I don't forget. So I'm writing 0, a 0. And then we go around the rest of them thinking, okay, which ones are going to be seams, which ones are going to be hems, which ones are going to have nothing on. So let's just continue with the nothing ones. And our center front here is going to be no seam or hem allowance because it's going to be on the fold. To mark it on the fold, what I do is I use my increment lines. I just line up one of them, doesn't matter which one. It just makes it look super neat. And then I'm just going like this with my arrow. So on the fold. Next, I'm gonna have a little look at my shoulder seams. Okay, with my shoulder seams, I would have a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Now this is in full scale, a 1 centimeter seam allowance. So we're gonna halve it for half scale. So we're gonna have 0.5 centimeter seam allowance, 0.5 here. And then the same with our sleeve. That's just gonna have a standard seam allowance, 0.5, our side seams, 0.5. And then we have hems here. With hems, I tend to do about a 1.5 or a 2 centimeter seam allowance. I'm going to do a 2 centimeter seam allowance with this because I want it to actually be a little bit of a feature that this has a thicker kind of view to it. Because I'll use sheer fabric to make this, I want to give it a little bit more weight and depth to it. So I'm actually going to be super intentional about it and make it 2 centimeters, this hem. So we would have 0.5 centimeters to fold back on itself, and then a 1.5 centimeter deep hem. Now, again, let's remember we are doing this in half scale. So this 2 centimeters is actually going to be 1 centimeter, like so. Okay, so those are our front and back bodices. Let's just write on here front bodice. We're going to get to the annotations very shortly, and then back bodice. But I find it helpful to write things as we go. Now we've got our sleeve. So let's write on here sleeve. We're going to go through the same process. So this is going to be a hem here. I'm going to do the exact same thing and make it more of a feature. So 1 centimeter. These are all going to be standard seams. So they're all going to be 0.5. Now what we want to do is we want to literally go around everything and add on our seam and hem allowances. And this is where the increment lines come in so handy, because you're not marking 1 centimeter, 1 centimeter, 1 centimeter all the way along. You're literally going to line up that 1 centimeter increment line that's indicated by the 1. And then you are going to draw a line like so. It's that simple. And then for the 0.5, you're going to use the 0.5 increment lines like so. And then to go around here, what I recommend doing is using that reference line in the center and making sure the top bit is at 90 degrees. And then you're just going to move your ruler and keep following that curve. Now, you might be wondering why I am not using the curves given. But the reason for that is because generally they're not really the curves you want. So it's a lot quicker just to do this method here. This is the method I've always used. I rarely use this curve around here because it is rarely the curve you actually want, like I was saying. And then you're literally going to go around all of your edges, adding on your hem and seam allowances, honoring the amounts you have written already on there, so that you can create your sewing patterns. All right, so you've added all your hem and seam allowances. Now the last thing to do to help us finish that hem and seam allowance around the edge is to finish our dart, because at the moment it's a bit of a open end what's going on there. So I have a little nifty trick to be able to make sure your dart is going to fit really nicely into that seam. The first thing you want to consider though is which way do you want the dart to fold. So start by literally just folding down both edges up to the apex. Then what you're going to do is literally place the end of the dart on the corner of a box, and then you're going to fold the dart so that it's going to fold the way you want it. So that means for this I want it to be folded downwards, so I'm going to grab that bottom edge of the dart, pinch it, and then I'm going to fold it up like so, and then I'm literally going to fold in that dart. And you can see as well the shaping that dart creates. So if you ever want to see what shaping a dart creates, you can do this exact same trick, but this also works for adding those hem and seam allowances. So then what I would do is I'm literally going to cut down that seam allowance line. So I'm cutting out my pattern now. Like so. And this is going to help finish that edge where that dart is, so it creates that point that you see on normal patterns there. Now, before we cut all of these patterns out, let's just see what we would do if we were then going to create the pattern for this dress. Now, this dress finishes on the waistline as well. So like we said, we're not going to change anything around the front and back bodice. But what we did want to do is create a gather pattern and also lengthen the sleeve. So let's start by lengthening the sleeve. It comes basically on that elbow line. So actually that elbow line again comes in really handy. That means our pattern piece is going to be this shape here. So actually all we'd want to do is then add on our hem and seam allowances. So we would add on our hem allowance. I'll do a 1 centimeter one again down here. This is going to end up being a solid line. I'm going to draw it in orange so you know which is this design and which is the original design. So this would then turn into a solid line. Our pattern piece will then be all of this, and we're just going to add our hem and seam allowances on there. So we've literally quickly and easily in seconds hacked our pattern to create another design. So then I could just extend these down, and then I'm going to show you how I would use this so that I don't have to create 2 different pattern pieces. I can literally do the same one. All I'm going to do is fold this under this, and I actually have an example to show you. So I would literally do this. I just fold up the part of the pattern I'm not using when I'm doing that top. So I would cut along where the edge of my hem allowance is for the longer sleeve, cut around all of the rest, and then I would fold this probably twice because you don't want to cut anything off when you're cutting around this bit here. So you want to make sure all the folds come before here, and then it's just really neatly folded underneath. So if you want to do the shorter sleeve, you can do the shorter sleeve. If you want to do the longer sleeve, you just fold it out. It's that simple. So now we want to create that gathered pattern piece for this bottom section. What you want to do is grab yourself an extra long piece of pattern paper. You want to make sure it's pretty big because you're obviously going to want to have extra pattern paper to be able to create those gathers. So then what we want to do is measure this and this so that we know what our finished gathered piece wants to be. So for me, that's 11.2 for the back. And then for the front, that is 11.8. So between them, 22, 23 centimeters. But then remember, we only have half here. So we're going to create this pattern piece so it's on the fold. So we're not creating a ridiculously large pattern piece, but we want to make sure we also double this measurement so that we have enough fabric to create the gathers. So not only are we going to do this on the fold, but we want to make sure we then have double the amount of fabric finished length so that we can then create the gathers. I find anything less than double just creates like kind of gathers, but it doesn't really go very even. So doubling that amount works really well. So 46 centimeters, and like I said, that wants to be on the fold, so it's gonna wrap all the way around the body. So that means we want the width to be 46 centimeters on the fold. Now what we want to know is the length, and what you can do is literally get a tape measure on yourself, measure from your waistline down to where you'd want this to be, and then you can create the pattern piece that length. So you're literally just gonna take your own measurement. There's no like set rule of like it needs to be this long. Everyone's different as well, so taking your measurement and really honors where you want things to be. And I'm going to do it so it's about 1 meter long. So in half scale, that is going to be half a meter. So by 1 meter, which actually means 0.5 meters in the half scale. So I literally want to create myself then a pattern piece that is going to be 46 centimeters wide by 50 centimeters long. So let's move some of this out of the way. Let's start with our width. We want to use our 90-degree line so that we make sure the top of our pattern piece is straight, and we'll do the same at the bottom. And then I'm going to just mark out where 20 comes through there, shift my ruler over, and I'm looking for 46 centimeters. I'm hoping I'm going to have enough width. Don't quite have enough width of my paper, so what I'm going to do, so you don't have to watch me sticking paper together, is I'm going to create my gather to the width of this paper. But what you will do is literally stick on an extra piece of pattern paper here, And then you can continue to 46 centimeters. And you're obviously going to want to have extra to add on your seam allowances as well. So I'm going to do my gather so it is 40 centimeters just to illustrate this for you. So this would be the width. Now what we want to do is measure down 50 centimeters for the length. Starts to get a big fat pattern piece. Okay, here we go. And then we're going to use our 90-degree line again and draw it across. And then I'm going to do it. So again, it's 40 centimeters, but you would have that extra paper on the side here to make sure it is the actual length. But you don't need to watch me sticking together pieces of paper. And then what we're going to do is join this up. Now, because my ruler won't meet here to here, again, what we can do is use our 90-degree lines. Go as far this way and then do the same with the other one and make sure it's super straight and it's got 90-degree angles on those corners. And then we're just going to join this in the middle. Like so. So there's our pattern piece. Let's mark on where our gather is at the top. So, and I like to put on here the finished gather length. So at the moment, this is going to be on the fold. So if we gathered just half of it, then we could write just what half gathered would be, but it just gets a bit confusing. So I like to write finished gather length is the measurement we had, which was the back bodice plus the front bodice times 2. So that is my 46 centimeters, like so. And then we can mark this as being on the fold. And then what you're going to do is add your hem and seam allowances again. So you are literally going to add your seam allowance, add your seam allowance, add your hem allowance. Just right on the fold. So this would be 0.5 for your seam allowance up here, 0.5 for your seam allowance here, and then 1 centimeters for your hem allowance here. Now, because we now don't have a hem at our waistline, what we would want to do is just fold this pattern to then create this as a seam allowance instead. So we'd mark on the seam allowance and then we'd fold this, both the back and front bodices. Now what you want to do is literally cut out all of your pattern pieces so they end up looking more like this, so that then you'll be able to cut around them when you are cutting out your fabric. So your front and back bodices would look something like this, and then the sleeve one would look something like this, and then you'd have that big rectangle for your gathered section. Then what we want to do, because we don't have any snazzy instruction books, and even if we did, it's still so handy to annotate your sewing patterns. It's going to mean that you know how they go together, not just tomorrow when you can remember, but in 5 years' time if you were to come back to that pattern as well. As you noticed, I'm all about optimizing the pattern drafting process. So of course, that is no different when it comes to annotating your sewing patterns. And I have created this pattern cutting checklist. This comes with all of my courses, or you can buy it on my Etsy store if you wanted to just purchase it individually. And it means you can use it as well as a little front cover for storing your patterns too, if you put them all in an envelope, and then you'll know this is exactly what pattern in here and the date you made it, who it's for, what you need, all the kind of things, and then it checks off all those annotations on every single pattern piece as well. So let's go through it and add these annotations to your sewing patterns. The first thing we want is the pattern title. So you can come up with a title for the pattern. I find just writing sleeve doesn't really help in the long run. You want to write what kind of garment it's for. So give it a fun name. It could just be like easy peasy top or like super comfy top, whatever you want to, just give it some kind of title. I'm just gonna write star so you don't have to watch me write loads of words right now, but come up with a little title, because you're going to find you end up having loads of sleeve patterns, loads of front bodice patterns, and then you don't know what it's for. So that is the first thing, and you can check this off as you go if you print it out or just use it on your iPad or tablet or whatever. Then you want to write the date. It means that if you create any different versions, you know which is the first version and which isn't the first version as well. I have no idea what the date is today. I think it's the 21st or 22nd of January. Let's write 22nd of January 25. And then, okay, so we've got that, and then the size. So this is a size 8.5 scale, and I'm writing on there the scale, so I don't think, oh, this is full scale. You're pretty sure to know, but it's just good to do these things. It's good to get into the practice of doing all this. Size 8. Trying to write quickly here and it's so messy. Okay, and then the next thing we want to do is the total number of pattern pieces and what pattern piece number this is, so you know what you're missing. And if you use this, you'll literally know this is pattern piece 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then if you're missing one, you'll know, oh, that's a sleeve one I'm missing. I need to find that one. It's kind of going to look like this. So I've got 3 pattern pieces for this top. So I'm just going to do it like this. Obviously, if I was doing the dress as well, I could just write on here, do it in the orange colour, and then add on the fact it was 4 pieces. And then I've done that one there. Then you want to write whether it's for woven or stretch fabric, because you don't use the same fabrics for woven or stretch generally. And then we want to write on what seam allowance we have added. And you can just shorten that to SA. And then the last thing we want to do is start adding some symbols on the pattern so we know exactly what things are doing. So that means bringing out our notch points so they're actually on the edge of the pattern, adding in our grain lines. So let's go about doing that. So we'll start with our grain lines. Our grain lines always want to go up and down the body. So use your center back and center front for these ones, and just use your increment lines. And all you're doing is marking on an arrow like so. Then the sleeve, again, still wants to go up and down the body. So we're going to use that center line as our reference, like so. And then the front bodice as well. So that's our grain lines done. Then we want to bring out those notches. So to bring out those notches, what you're going to do is grab your pattern cutting ruler, place that 90-degree line there along where that notch is, and then just bring out your notch like so. And then just move it, bring out your notch like so. So you've got your 2 on your back there, and now they're at the edge of the pattern, so we know to mark those on. And then you've got your 1 notch on the front bodice. And then you'll do the same on the sleeve. So lining up that 90-degree angle, 1, 2, and then we'll do this too. Now the other notches I like to add on as well are hem ones, so you know where you're going to fold that hemline up to, where it's going to finish. So I just bring those across like so, and then I do the same on all of these too. Just needs to come out where the side seam is. Obviously, if there's no seam at the center front where you've got that fold line, you don't need to have a notch there. Okay, so those are my notches. Now the only other notch we want to make sure we've got is where the zip is going to finish. So anything that's going to be useful to mark around the edge of your pattern, that wants to become a notch on your pattern. Now the darts, we've already got that marked in. There's 1 dart here, there's 1 here, but we do want to, again, bring out those notches, which is why this checklist is so good. It just reminds you of everything. Now with the dart, what you want to do is continue your line out. So it's going to come like that. You don't want to do it at the 90 degrees. You want to make sure your dart continues on the same line it already is on. So continue those edges of the dart so that it comes out like this. And then you do the same on this one too. So continuing those edges of the darts, you're not doing that 90-degree line here, that 90-degree wall here, sorry. You're continuing those lines like so. So we've got those notch points for the darts. And then any fold lines, we've already got that. On the fold is this one. And then any other design annotations, we have everything there. The only other one was on that big piece for that dress that we've designed with that gather. You want that wavy line that we've already drawn on there. So then you will have 3 pattern pieces that look like this, but they'll all be beautifully cut out, ready to turn into a little miniature garment that will look something like this for the little top version. How adorable. So cute and adorable, right? And you can do the same for the dress. You can create a mini toile, really good to check the balance and also to go through the sewing process. As you don't have that shiny instruction book, it's going to give you a chance to just practice what order you're sewing everything in before you go and create it in full scale and those final fabrics as well. If you're thinking now, I want to keep drafting, tell me how to draft another sewing pattern, then you can check out my other tutorial, very similar to this. The only difference is I am showing you how to draft a pair of trousers. Now, because you already know what tools you have, you already got them in front of you, you can skip to the section using the chapter markers where I show you how to get clear on your design so you know what we're drafting, and then you'll be able to see how to create the to-do list, and then of course how to draft that pattern, finish it, ready for using as well. But if you're like, no, Sarah, I want to know everything to be able to create any top, shirt, jumpsuit, play suit, skirt, shorts, pair of trousers, whatever clothing idea you can dream up, then Design Confidence, my in-depth program to creating your own sewing patterns, is the place to be. This is where I show you all the drafting techniques. Think how to make cuffs, how to draft a button stand, how to draft a collar, how to draft plackets, all the different techniques so that you can combine everything together to create your sewing patterns for those dream clothes. And like I said at the beginning of this tutorial, you're not just going to learn the how, you're going to learn the why behind what you're doing as well. So it really is possible for you to be able to create those clothing ideas of your dreams. I'll pop the link for this below so you can check out more details around this. And of course, if you've got any questions, drop them in the comments, drop them in my DMs, or send me over an email, whatever method works best for you. And if you have any requests of tutorials as well, let me know. I always love to hear from you. I always love to hear what you are wanting to turn into reality as well, so I can really support you in making those dream clothes. But for now, a huge thank you for today. If you love this tutorial, give it a like. If you want to see more things like this, then subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I will see you in another video.